First I'm going to remove this brake pedal switch. Next I'm going to remove that front brake line. And now I'm going to remove the 9/16 bolts that bolt the master to the firewall. Well, we're thinking it was leaking out the back here, but that actually looks pretty dry. The only thing I could think of is maybe it's leaking right out of here. The whole thing was wet, and it was wet here. I might try to tighten this up and put the master back on and see if it's still leaking. Okay, so I went ahead and put new thread sealer on the brake light switch on this front adapter here, and also this plug down here, which is the one I think was actually leaking. Take a look here at the back. It's perfectly dry. That's not where it was leaking from. So I'm going to throw this back on, and then we're going to have to bleed up the brakes again, and hopefully they hold. So last time I found it easier to push the clutch pedal in so that rod got pushed further and I could pop the rubber boot back on over the slip. So I'm going to try that again. Alright, so those bolts are tight. My dad's tightened up the brake line. And I'm going to spray this off a little bit. We're going to try to bleed the brakes. Well, we pulled the master off and I put new thread sealer on all this stuff, and we put it back in and bled up the brakes, and there wasn't much air coming out. So the other thing we're thinking is it might be a problem with the brake shoe adjustment. So we're gonna have to do some research on adjusting those, and then we're thinking that's probably the issue, because you can, if you hit the pedal one time, it goes almost to the floor, and then you can pump it up and then it holds pretty good. You let off, come back a few minutes later, hit the brake and it goes back to the floor. So we're thinking that one of the shoes, or maybe multiple of the shoes, might be out of adjustment. So that's the next thing we're gonna take a look at.
Tell them straight down. So this should turn this way to tighten up.
So we were able to get the front brakes adjusted up, but the rears, the adjustment screw just spun all the way around. We couldn't get it to contact. So we're thinking we're probably going to need some oversized shoes for that, and gonna go out there and see if I can get the alternator charging. So we had it tested, and it is a good alternator. And I did some research and found that we don't have a charging light on this alternator, so I'm going to make one today. This is an old marker light off a Cherokee. This wire should always be grounded, and then once it starts charging, it should put power on it. You hook one side to there, and you hook this side to your ignition power, and you turn the ignition on, and the light should light up, and then you start charging, aka like the engine's running, and the light should turn off. So I'm just going to jump it between here, because this is power all the time, straight from the battery. So I'm just going to jump it right across and make sure that that's the problem. And then I'll probably tap into ignition power up here at the coil, and make it look better. But just want to test and make sure it works. Okay, so I have this hooked up and plugged the battery on, and so now, in theory, if you start it up, that charge light should turn off. Okay, so once you kick the idle up, that light turns off, and I tested the battery. We had about 14.5 volts. So I'm thinking that's what our issue was. So I'm just letting the exhaust fumes kind of get out of the tent, and then I'm going to make it look better. So I went ahead and put this back together, and I pulled this pin out, put some heat shrink on the right where the crimp goes in, because it's just getting a little thin there, and we don't have another connector. So I figure I'll put some heat shrink on it and keep all the stress off of it. And I think I'm going to mount the bulb just right here. Under the hood. I looked inside, and there's a couple places where, now that I think about it, there's this bulb here that might have been the original charging light. I'm not 100% sure, but there are a couple spots here where I could put some bulbs, but I kind of figure let's put it under the hood. It'll be fine under the hood. And then I'll run the wire along here and up to some ignition power. So I got the bulb mounted, and I got the connector crimped on. So I'm just going to slide this heat shrink over it, and I'll shrink that down. And then this side, I'll run along here and up to ignition. So I had to get a little bit creative, but the only gauge of connector I had on hand was just a male and a female, so it's alright, it's all good. I'm going to tape this up to make it look a little better, but I just ran the wire along with this one. Got heat shrink on these 2 butt connectors, so yeah, it ended up alright. I taped that up so it's just not, bright green, and I tested to make sure we still had power there. It went through the connector and everything. So it turned out alright. Now we're just going to start it up and make sure it's all working correctly. So now that we got that problem fixed, next thing we're going to have to do is get some brake parts ordered up. Hopefully get the pedal height correctly and stop the steering wheel from pulsating.